Hello, everyone. I'm Bartholomew Bland. I'm the executive director of the Lehman College Art Gallery. And thank you for joining us today for Creative Connections, which is an ongoing series that we've been doing, interviewing faculty and alumni of Lehman College who have gotten their degrees in MFAs, who have taught at the college. And in each of our series, we are asking about early influences on creativity, what makes the artist tick, and thoughts about becoming a professional artist. And I'm very lucky today to be joined by Shawn Cheng, who teaches at Lehman College, teaches our typography and typology class, and he's a member of the comics collective, Partika. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Partika.
Partika,
yeah.
and a core contributor to all ages fantasy anthology, Cartzoia Tales. I'm mangling everything. Is that Cartzoia?
Cartozia Tales.
Cartozia Tales. And his comics have appeared in anthologies like Best American Comics, The Graphic Canon, and the SPX Anthology. And his paintings and prints have been shown at Fredericks and Fraser here in New York, Giant Robot in LA and San Francisco, as well as at the Worcester Art Museum. And his first solo show was held at Franklin Artworks in Minneapolis. And Shawn was born in Taiwan, and he grew up on Long Island. Well, to say North Shore, South Shore.
North Shore.
North Shore, the right shore. And he studied art at Yale University, where he concentrated on painting and printmaking. So thank you very much for joining us today, Shawn. I like your background.
Thanks for having me.
You've got a very swirly cloud-based backdrop there. Is that of your own making?
Yeah, it's a work in progress right now. So I'm just working on some kind of background textures and creating a setting for the next for the scene that I'm working on.
Now, is that an image that you've projected behind you, or is that the actual work?
That's the actual work. It's a painting. So it's
it'd be quite grandly scaled, right?
Yeah. I've sort of I work small most of the time, but I also like to work big once in a while. And I think at some point in my painting making career, I realized that I liked kind of scaling up my work without without zooming into the work. So kind of just increasing the image size, but keeping all the kind of the details intact.
Fair. Oh, so that's keeping the details intact. So it gives you a moment to make a grand statement. For each of the people we have on Creative Connections, I'm sort of asking you to maybe go back to your childhood and reflect a little bit about sort of when was the first time. Did you know as a young child that you wanted to be an artist, or were you? Was there a particular visual moment, an aha moment? Did your parents take you to museums, or how did you first sort of get interested in art?
So I grew up in Taiwan. I spent my elementary school years in Taiwan. So I was exposed to a lot of Japanese media, particularly anime and manga, and that's sort of how my first obsession, I guess, with visual art was through those media, and particularly the work of Akira Toriyama, which I think most of our students know through his work with Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. I see a lot of those things in my drawing class. Students would have that in their sketchbook or on their backpacks or whatnot. So I share a lot of these initial inspirations with my students, which I think I'm excited by, because I guess it also indicates I'm not too old. So yeah, I
was ready to say, like, are these the 90s that we're talking about here? That you would have your sort of formative years in Taiwan?
This is the 80s.
The
yeah,
80s?
So yeah, I'm a child of the 80s, and that was about the time when Akira Toriyama was creating these these works, these comics works that were later adapted into movies and TV series, and kind of it's now a global empire. But I think his original kind of authorship came from the comic books, which I was exposed to, and that had a heavy influence on my early development as a drawer. You know, because I think a very easy way to get into drawing is to emulate something that you're inspired by, or that the characters that you love. So that was how I first started drawing, is by emulating these styles and characters, and then that kind of led into further exploration of what drawing is. And I think looking back at his work, actually, I'll share my screen now.
Wonderful. Yes, we're going to give it some source material from the.
So like I mentioned, it's Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball Z fame is my first big influence, and you know, I'm sure everyone recognizes this character, and I just love the way that I love his line. I love the way that he draws, and the way that he delineates the form. And now as a drawing instructor, looking back on his work, I'm struck by the attention to detail that he has on not the characters, which I was initially intrigued by when I was a child, but by kind of the mechanical world that he sets his characters in, and that to me shows a real keen eye for observation, which I think I tried to impart in my drawing classes. Is this kind of presence in momentness, and kind of looking at objects as they are, and understanding their structure. And I think in this image, in the motorcycle, you can really see kind of a careful looking, right, and
absolutely fascinating, a bit of detail, and probably the inverse of what you would expect, where the character would be more fully detailed and realized, the human figures, and that the motorcycle would be sort of more abstracted, right?
Yeah, and I think as I learned more about him and his work, I learned that he's an avid model builder. So he would draw, work on his comics for 8-12 hours a day, and then his reward to himself for completing the day's tasks would be to break out a model set and making kind of creating these motorcycles or cars or planes from these modeling kits, right? So I think here's a few more examples of how I think those things are become internalized in his kind of in his worldview, and even though these are fictional objects, they have a sense that they're grounded in some sort of reality. And I think the reality is his the time that he spent observing how things connect and how things are put together, right? And I think there's a level of craft that I find very inspiring, and craft in the sense of just spending time creating an image in this case, but also craft as in the act of putting something together, right?
Absolutely. And were these were these images sort of ubiquitous when you were a child? I mean, students very taken with them? That was sort of the popular entertainment, would you say?
Yeah, they were very popular when I was a child, and so you would see these characters on various TV shows, magazines, posters. Maybe not to the extent they are now, but these are definitely kind of pop culture staples, I would say.
So you were one of the things that I picked up that you mentioned was the idea of not exactly copying these, but doing drawings that were very long um, tradition of art history, that idea of sort of copying from the master and then really sort of learning from that has a universal kind of appeal. So did you start to gradually transform these pieces into your own? I mean, did you have an aha moment when they started sort of becoming more your own and less of a sort of copying exercise?
Yeah, I would say so, definitely. So I think there is an element of copying from a master, right? And kind of the act of retracing the master's steps. You learn something about the process, and then also the realization that in order to create a convincing fiction, you have to know a lot of nonfiction, right? So in order to create a kind of sci-fi aircraft that looks like it might actually exist and have a function, it's probably worthwhile to know about how actual vehicles are put together. So I think there's a lesson in there of how non-creative kind of observation and looking at the world can inform the kind of creative work that ultimately you want to do. And I think that's maybe a leap that is not always obvious, right? So sometimes something that seems like boring work can actually pay off in something that you're passionate about later on.
The idea you have to put in those man hours to those working hours to finally sort of become at least a proficient craftsman before you can leap.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right.
Um, and how old were you when you came to Long Island?
So we moved to the U.S. When I was 8, and we moved to Long Island when I was 10.
So you were, and
I'm sorry, you're freezing.
I was going to say, what was that experience like for you? Was it jarring? Was it exciting? How did you adapt to that adjustment?
It was definitely extremely jarring because I didn't know a word of English when I arrived to the U.S. I knew the alphabet, but I hardly knew any words, and I didn't even know my own name, my own English name. I remember on the first day of school, this was in public school in Queens. I was in 3rd grade, and the teacher was taking attendance, and she got to my name, but I didn't respond because I didn't know that was me, and the kid sitting next to me had to look on my pile of notebooks where my parents had written my name and said, "Oh, here's Shawn," and that's how they realized there's this new kid who doesn't speak any English. But actually, drawing. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and did you like the way that your name sounded in English? Was that just did it take you a long time to adjust to that, or the sort of that sort of realization? Did it sort of set up a kind of expanded identity, I guess?
I mean, it was definitely jarring, even though my name in English and Chinese sounds similar.
Hmm.
But it definitely drove home the idea that this is a new place and I have a new identity.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, drawing was one of the ways that I started to kind of communicate with the kids in my class um, because because the Dragon Ball characters and Ninja Turtles, that's kind of a universal language for young boys, right? So that was how I made some of my friends in elementary school, was that I would draw Ninja Turtle characters at lunchtime, and people would kind of line up
Rush
and ask.
over to see what you were doing. Yes.
Yeah, and kind of line up and have requests for me to fulfill during lunch hour.
Now, did that also conversely make it easier for you to learn English? I mean, were you looking at television programs that you recognize that have been dubbed into English, so you sort of knew the plots of these stories? Was that did it sort of work in both directions, or was it jarring to sort of see those in a different language that you might not have been familiar with?
It was, I mean, I think the media, the cartoon media definitely helped me learn English, but it wasn't that I was rewatching shows that I recognized. It was I was getting bombarded with an entirely new set of characters and images, but I was engaged enough with it that that definitely, I think, helped me pick up the language, is kind of immersing myself in those TV shows.
Interesting, interesting. And so, as you were going along through the school system in Long Island, how was your art career progressing?
So as I went through my schooling, I kind of went to I went to kind of a painting class on the weekends where it was definitely the philosophy was kind of copying the old masters. So I would spend a couple hours every weekend going to this teacher's house in Flushing in New York and copying something that I picked out, right? And I think that process kind of goes back. It goes back to the idea of spending time and learning the craft, right? So it wasn't. I didn't get to draw Dragon Ball characters or comics characters or Spider-Man when I was in those classes, but the time spent with the material, the paint, right, and those things allowed me, I think, to be able to develop the comics art or the more creative parts of my drawing that I didn't totally realize was there.
Interesting. And did you have a particular teacher during this period of time that was particularly influential on you? Since I know you teach as well,
Mm-hmm.
do you think back to a particular art teacher that made a big impact on you?
Yeah, this teacher Xie in Flushing was definitely a big influence on me. Not in terms of I don't think she was an older artist, and I don't think um, was quite she quite related to the kind of newer comics type of art. But I think she instilled in me the ideas of craft and learning and kind of honing one's skill to be able to once you hone your skill, then you can choose the different methods that you're going to apply it with, right? And different subject matter. So I think that was important in my development.
Wonderful. Do you have another slide there you're going to show us?
Yeah. So some of my other childhood influences. This is Akira, the classic animated movie, and this also. So I came to this through the movie first, but this was also based on a manga, which actually I find extremely engaging in the way that, like we talked about, it takes real world things that are carefully observed, but kind of mashes it together in a way that that creates this new kind of visually dense, almost abstract thing that still tells a kind of a story that exists in pop culture, right? So to me, these are really engaging images, but they serve to tell a narrative, and I think that has been a big part of my work, is kind of is creating images that have a bit of a narrative or a literary kind of sensibility to them.
Interesting.
And the visual density is something that I'm very interested in.
Wonderful. And so so that was another influence. And then by the time you were in high school, what was sort of happening? Were you thinking about a professional career as an artist?
I was thinking about studying art, but I was also considering going into graphic design as kind of a art adjacent kind of career, and that's sort of how it panned out. So after I graduated college, I started working at a design firm, and that was my quote unquote day job. And
I have a question. Was your family supportive of you studying art and going into design? Was that something that they particularly wanted you to do? Were they always impressed by the kind of work that you had been making as a young person? Or
I think I was lucky that my family was supportive of my artistic pursuits. It's in relation to other Asian families that I know, I don't think I got as much pressure to go into particular career fields as some of my friends did. So I think my family has always been supportive of my art, with the caveat that they hope that I knew what I was doing, and I could make a living off of it. I think they had I think somewhat naive and stereotypical view that all artists are starving artists, which was a misconception that I myself had, until I went to college, right? So I think I would say to students now that there are many things that you can do with the skills that you develop making art for yourself, that you can use in various careers and jobs. Maybe you won't be able to make a living drawing your own characters, but there's definitely routes out there where you can do things that kind of feed into that are still creative and rewarding, I think.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So you got your degree as an undergraduate. What did you get your degree in? What did you
I
take?
I was a Bachelor of Arts, concentrating in painting and printmaking.
Painting and printmaking. Okay,
Yeah.
so um, and uh, and so then what did you? How did you go? So how did you make the transition from when you graduated to your first professional job? How did that come about?
That was a stroke of luck, actually, because I graduated. When I graduated, that was in 2002. That was in the middle of uh, the kind of the dot-com bust.
Yeah, yeah.
But fortunately, I had I had made some internship relationships the previous years that I was able to kind of get a get another internship right out of school. So um, that kind of jump started my career as a designer. Um, and
So you found that. So were you? So you found the internships helpful. Where were you interning? What kinds of internships were you doing?
I interned at graphic design agencies, web design agencies. Um, the companies I worked for were agency.com and Plural. I don't know. I don't think they're still around these days, but they were. We worked on big clients, and that was when the web was relatively new, right? Web design was relatively new, so I was able to pick up a lot of skills in graphic design and in animation. Um,
And work for the web, so that gave you a hot commodity, right? That you had a very marketable skill.
yeah,
Marketplace.
yeah, and I think that helped me with my art pursuits because I set up Partyka with my friends around that time. And one of the things that we had was a website where we posted drawings to the internet every day, just as a way of kind of keeping ourselves working. And so definitely the skills that I picked up doing graphic design fed into that.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Do you want to? Do you have another slide you'd like to show us?
I'm sorry?
I said, do you have another image that you'd like to show us as we're going along here?
Yeah. Do you want to see more influences, or do you want to see some of my work?
I would love to see your work. That would be
Okay. So I guess we can quickly go through some of the other influences. This is from a anime called Evangelion, and it's got giant robots and weird monsters, which I really love, and this kind of kind of swarm-like quality that goes into that kind of starts turning into abstraction, which I find really interesting visually. Here's some comics influence that I had, and of course another big influence on me when I was going through college was kind of studying these old Japanese woodblock prints. And so I think once we look at some of my paintings, you might see some of the kind of palette sensibilities and maybe composition sensibilities reflected in that. So let me just jump ahead, actually. Here is Yoshitoshi, who's one of my favorites. Okay, so let me look at some of my work. So I think my artistic arc, I think, started out with comics, and then kind of I graduated with a degree in painting and printmaking, and I kind of had a break with painting. I was a bit disillusioned with painting, so I didn't paint for a few years, and in that time, that was when I did when I created this comics collective Partica with some friends, and we would create these small handmade comics that we would bring to art fairs and comics conventions to sell and distribute, right? That was how my how I continued making art while I was trying to figure out what painting meant to me. So I think that this this to me, it was my kind of furthering the idea of craft, right? Like actually creating an object that was where you spent time on the individual things, even though they're basically mass produced. So I hand sewed all of the books, and I hand cut them. And here's some examples of the comics. And I think I was trying to develop my line during these times, and
is that why you became disenchanted with painting? Is that you weren't satisfied with the line that you were getting in it, and you were moving towards a more graphic interest in the line? Is that's
definitely a part of it. Yeah, that's a really good observation, because I felt I had much more control of the line, and I could express my intentions much more with the line than with paint, and then also I felt like there was a lot of kind of baggage with painting that I felt like if I wanted to make something, I had to justify it in a way that I didn't feel like I had to when I made a comic. So I think that was my way of making something that spoke to me, that I didn't feel like I needed to justify its format or its or the way it was executed, and where maybe a level of craft and aesthetics was a positive rather than kind of a potential kind of negative.
Interesting.
Yeah. So here's some other comics I created around that time. So I think the some of the through lines in my comics into my painting work is I love the idea of this visual density and kind of like narrative elements, and kind of taking recognizable characters and putting them into maybe a new context, or kind of designing a character that already exists, but designing it in a new way. That was always a fun challenge for me.
Now, when you're working on your comics, do you usually create the narratives? Are you doing them in partnerships with people all of the time? Do you sometimes come up with the story before the illustrations? Do you let an idea for a particular illustration drive the narrative?
So I think the narrative usually comes first, although I like comics, and I like to make comics where each panel is sort of a standalone, could be a standalone image. A big part of cartooning and making comics is knowing what to simplify and what to eliminate, right? Because you're drawing something over and over again. But I myself was always drawn to the comics that seemed like that seemed impractical, I guess. The comics that seemed like it would take too long to create, and that was sort of what I aspired to make, is to make. I guess now, in hindsight, I would say I was trying to make a comic where every panel was potentially a painting on its own, right? Which I think is actually, if you wanted to be a prolific cartoonist, that's not a very practical way of working.
Taking series painting to the extreme, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so a lot of times I take I use as source material existing narratives. So I did a series where I adapted the Wizard of Oz books in the and I turned them into these kind of single page broadsheets like Little Nemo in Slumberland.
Interesting. And not that many people know that there are all of those Oz books. There are a dozen or more of them, aren't there? It's
yeah. There were 14 by
Baum.
Baum. That's the original, and then there were other authors that continued doing it for years afterwards. Yeah, so the Wizard of Oz was a fun kind of rich kind of well of source material to create images out of.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think then my comics work sort of then started to get more and more kind of a little bit less and less narrative, I guess, and more image intensive, and I think that was when I didn't realize it, but that was when I was ready to move back into painting, because I was creating these dense panels that had hints of narration or hints of narrative, but they were kind of composed as kind of single images.
Single panels, yes.
Yeah. So these are excerpts from a project that I did called Road of Knives, and it was kind of this fantasy sci-fi world where monsters fought each other, and I had a lot of fun kind of like coming up with these different creatures and drawing them.
Let's talk a bit about monsters, because I read in one of your statements about the sort of centrality of monsters in your work and what they represent in terms of societal anxieties and people's deepest fears. Why do you relate to or not relate to them, but why are you so intrigued by the monster?
I'm intrigued by them because of how variable they are, and how surprising they are, and how just by kind of mixing and matching recognizable parts from different sources, you can kind of create this new thing that has a new meaning separate from its constituent parts, and in a way that's sort of the way I work, right? Is that I take recognizable bits from different visual traditions and different kind of mythological traditions, and I use those as a jumping off point to create something that starts with something that I saw in the real world, but turns into something new, right? So similar to the way that Akira Toriyama would draw all these different mechanical parts, but altogether it created a new kind of machine.
Kind of machine.
Yeah. Yes. And so here's some of the large paintings that I did. These are the same size as the painting behind me.
Mhm.
So so what like I mentioned before, I wanted to keep the kind of the level of detail of a drawing, but on a canvas that was much larger, and I liked the result of that because it kind of expanded my work from being kind of character or figure central to something that exists in a wider world,
Mhm.
and I thought that was
And,
that was
to maintain that detail at the much larger scale, that would be extremely labor intensive for you.
yeah, these were fairly labor intensive works to make, and the also the way that the method that I was using to transfer the line art onto the canvas also kind of made it a bit labor intensive.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I think thematically, what I like about monsters is that there's this tension between kind of the what's natural and what's unnatural, right? And the thing that or what's natural and what's man-made. And I think in this series of paintings, I wanted to create kind of snapshots of moments of conflict between these creatures that kind of reflect the the tension between what's natural and what's synthetic. I think.
That's interesting. And I've noticed in some of these paintings, do you have more in the series that you'd like to?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the interest of the sort of, I noticed a lot of them kind of biomorphic forms against these landscapes. That is very, very interesting. This one's a very ferocious looking one, uh, particularly ferocious, the
Mhm.
combatant monsters, yes.
Yeah. So I think there's I think this harkens back to the manga work that spoke to me when I was a kid. That kind of like visually dense and almost abstracted um, field of marks, right? And they kind of there are figures and there's a story in there, but at first glance, it's a very kind of noisy and confusing maybe image to take in, and that was something that
And so this would this scale be about 60 inches across, something like that?
it's 48 inches across.
48 inches across. So I'm sure if you're looking at this at 4 feet, it's a lot easier to get sort of lost in the detail of some of these images. Yes,
Yeah.
fascinating.
So here's another painting in that series. Again, it's sort of like the conflict between these mythological creatures and these kind of other 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 animals that I was trying to turn into almost pattern like forms in the composition.
Natural world, beautiful. Becomes almost a textile, and it's interesting the surface being so close with the frogs, and yet there is
Mhm.
that sense of depth behind it. It's sort of a screen or a rain of these creatures with the less obvious depth behind it. That's quite interesting. And you've got the same kind of sinuous line, this kind of biomorphic line that you had in the first one in this series that you showed us, that I think is quite beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. So this
And these, how recent are these paintings, Shawn?
these are a couple of years old. I like I said, the process of creating these were very labor intensive, and I felt like I was I was spending more time executing the idea rather than coming up with the idea. And I think the the act when you're drawing and when you're drawing with the possibility of creating something surprising, I think that's the most exciting part of drawing and of painting. And I my kind of method of creating these uh, relied a lot of pre-planning, and then once I had the whole thing mapped out, I would actually go in and execute it, right? And that wasn't something that after creating a set of these that I thought was it wasn't very fun in the end. So what I've been doing recently is trying to figure out a way of creating images like this, but without that like added layer of process.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, for each of our artists, I've been asking a kind of final question about what have you been doing during the COVID pandemic, and I imagine you've had experienced a lot of isolation. You pointed to the picture that you're sitting behind, which is such a dramatic backdrop. But has your work changed during this? I mean, has this forced a change on you, being at home more, or how do you feel like this is 2020 sort of impacted your work?
I think it's made my work smaller and more intimate because I had to move out of the studio that I had before pandemic, and I now have a makeshift studio in my apartment, and so I the work that I've been making, I've had to do on a smaller scale.
I
And
suppose, yeah. But does having the studio, makeshift though it is, in your apartment, is that help creativity that you can run in there whenever you want? It's not a process of leaving your home and then going to the studio. Has that shifted anything at all?
I think it's a mixed bag, right? It's great that it's here and accessible, and there's no commute, but it's also I think it also kind of breaks down the separation of, like, you know, I'm going to the studio and I'm going to work.
Yeah, it's easier to become distracted by a myriad of
Yeah,
things. Yes, that's very.
exactly.
Are you looking forward to getting back on campus at some point? I'm sure it's
Yeah, I think I'm ready to go back into the classroom.
yes. Well, I hope that we will see you at the gallery when I hope you'll bring the students to the gallery when we're open again in the fall. And
Yeah,
I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Shawn. I really appreciate it.
thanks for having me.